was originally paid for by the Republicans. That's
No,
how Hillary got
Prove it. You're
yes,
a liar.
it was.
You're a liar.
Because it came from that former MI6 guy, and they've got it for during the early campaign.
You
mean the guy that?
Coder, if you don't mind me asking, or Ryan, whatever you prefer to go by, what was the?
Yeah, Ryan's fine.
You were talking about neo-fascism with your sort of.
Yeah.
What can you define fascism?
Yeah, fascism is generally, I mean, historically it's obviously manifested in a lot of different ways, but generally I use the phrase like authoritarian ultranationalism is a good working definition.
Okay, so you're not one of these people that say it can only be right-wing or left-wing.
Oh, I mean, it is a right-wing movement, yeah. But I mean, like, if you're asking me, like I would say, like, Stalinism was a fascist movement, but I would also argue that it was kind of a right-wing movement, but that's a different story.
Okay, so then what? I like the laughter. That is worth laughing about. But what is it like when we criticize something as fascist? What are you really criticizing? So, for example, if we said Trump's response sending in the National Guard was fascist, what is the criticism you have? That it's a nationalist movement, or is it the action itself?
So when it comes to the National Guard thing, it's both parts, right?
Okay.
It's authoritarian in that he's overriding the law because he's not taking in Gavin Newsom's word on, like Newsom's supposed to be involved in the deployment of the National Guard according to the law that Trump cited to do that. And second of all, it's nationalist because I mean obviously they are finding people who they believe don't belong here. That's the whole thing. They're like trying to find the people who they think they're not part of America. They're not real Americans. Like that's it's kind of. Did
you find? Let's just focus on the authoritarian part. Like the motivation behind it seems to be less important than the acts itself, right? Like for example, if Trump's team decides to round up a bunch of people because Trump becomes a communist, you would still be against the rounding up. The motivation's less important than the act, correct?
Sure, yeah.
Did you have a problem when we saw like claims through the Twitter files and elsewhere that after January 6th, there were government agencies that pressured social media companies to censor people that had questions about the 2020 election? Would you call that authoritarian?
My understanding is that they flagged certain accounts. But they didn't like say like, oh, ban these accounts. There was just like a list of accounts that they were like hey, these are like shady accounts or whatever. Did they actually say like ban these people?
Well, there was testimony. In fact, if you're doing that research, right, for the topic that we're going to talk about here in late June, that at least one judge that looked at the case said it was the biggest attack on the First Amendment that he ever saw. Now, granted, the Supreme Court overruled it for a lack of standing, but the evidence strongly suggests that these social media companies felt pressured. In fact, we saw directly when it came for the heads of Twitter, when it came to the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story, that internal communications from Twitter
like 24 hours, right?
What's that?
Wasn't that censored for like 24 hours there?
Well, it's irrelevant. The point I'm trying to make here is that the people at these companies, at the head of them, felt that they were being fucking really pressured by the government. But my point is, even if we just say it was just flagging, isn't that sort of an anti-free speech, sort of authoritarian thing that the government did?
Well, it depends on what they're being flagged for.
Well, let's say criticism, saying that the 2020 election would, I have to be careful, we're on YouTube, I don't want, saying that there were problems of a magnanimous effort in the 2020 election. You get what I'm saying without using the actual word?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's all they were flagged for. I'm not sure.
But let's say it was, for the sake of argument. Would that be okay?
Actually, you don't even need the sake of argument. You have congressional testimony where they put this out over and over throughout the course of months. And Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger and a number of other high-profile journalists were a part of it, and they showed all of the internal communications between the federal government and Twitter, where they were specifically saying you need to remove their internal emails showing. You can go back to the Twitter files, as much of a limited hangout as they are. You can go back to them and you can look at internal communications between the Biden administration and Twitter executives, where they're highlighting specific accounts, where they're highlighting specific tweets, saying this has to go, this isn't okay. We would prefer, and yes, they do kind of couch it in a little bit of more nicer political.
So they're not just saying this has to go.
But
to be clear, you're saying they're couching in language. So they're not saying that it has to go.
Okay,
right?
It's an implied directive with the threat of punishment on the back end. So in diplomatic
actually
circles,
explicitly
I'm
ask
not
for
sure
tweets to be taken
what
down.
else you would expect.
Sorry, continue on.
So it's like,
oh yeah,
I
so
don't think
Donald
AM
Trump. Hang on, real quick, Rob. Donald Trump specifically asked Twitter to take down the post of Chrissy Teigen calling him a pussy ass bitch, which is hilarious because he is a pussy ass bitch.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I have a problem with that. I actually also have a problem with Trump sort of paying lip service to his administration, saying that Terry Moran should be suspended or fired. I don't particularly like that, but the magnitude of those two people facing some sort of consequence that will basically led to nothing versus millions of people being banned off social media from certain subjects seems to be completely different. And so I don't disagree with what AM was saying, but the problem, AM, is this. Like, what'll happen is you'll say, but this did happen, and Ryan will say, prove it, and then you'll spend 3 hours going through a piece of evidence. I'm not saying that that's not an appropriate discussion to have, but in the long form panel, I'll just ask for the sake of argument, Ryan, if that did happen, right, without us proving it, just hypothetically, if it happened, if people in the Biden administration pressured social media to censor posts because they contained what they thought was disinformation about the 2020 election, do you think that that's authoritarian and something that we should criticize?
Wait, hang on. Somebody clarify this for me because I might be confused. What time span does the Twitter files reference?
I don't know. It references slight at the beginning of the Trump administration or the end of the Trump administration with the pandemic, but then goes largely into the Biden administration.
And this is where I'm thinking, right? So when you're talking about like the suppressing of like the Hunter Biden laptop, from what I'm looking at, that looks like October 2020.
Correct.
Who was the administration in charge of the U.S. government in October of 2020?
Irrelevant.
It was Trump,
irrelevant.
Right?
It's irrelevant to this point, right? It's irrelevant to the fact
but
that
you're arguing the U.S. government was.
Does Donald Trump? So you would argue that every single governmental employee that was there under Joe Biden was operating at the behest of Joe Biden, and he's responsible for all their actions?
I mean, that's what I hear argued all the time.
Well, I think you're arguing with morons then. Like, it's clear.
It might be hot, yeah, that's true.
Get a better caliber of opponent. It's clear that there were people within these agencies that were not Trump supporters. For example, is it your real argument that you think 51 former intel agents and people within that still had security clearances that were there when Donald Trump was in office were censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story because they were helping Trump?
Couldn't it just be because they thought it was misinformation?
It could be theoretically, but why don't they step in? Why is it always when they step in about
I know
misinformation,
most of
it goes
Biden's
one
requests
direction?
about the laptop had to do with the explicit images of his son in
but
there.
That wasn't what they
other stuff.
But that wasn't what was going on. So, for example, there was this meeting that occurred in the Aspen Institute, and I forget the name of the agency through the government that was putting on this hearing, but it had a bunch of these social media places, and it was talking about Russian disinformation to affect the 2020 election. And it specifically said that, hypothetically, what if, this is going to blow your mind, what if there were accusations made that someone in the Biden family worked for corrupt groups in places like Ukraine? Well, this would be a good example of Russian disinformation to censor the 2020 election. So the people at Twitter admitted, and I think Zuckerberg's admitted this as well, though I could be wrong, that they were primed for this exact story, not because it had Hunter Biden pictures of him nude, but because the allegations made forth were something that the intel agencies knew. They knew about this laptop. They knew the information and it was accurate. And so they were priming media to not just censor. The censorship's not even really the problem. It was the fact that it was censored for a moment, and then the American people were like, wow, that's unprecedented that this was censored, that these intel officials came out and said this is garbage, so no one believed the story. That's
yeah,
the
but
problem.
isn't the worst story on the Hunter Biden laptop like a meeting that was appointed for like $700,000, right? It was like a Gazprom meeting for $700,000, and isn't that like the biggest story on the Hunter Biden laptop?
No, there's
because like we can talk about $1 million deals that go on inside of the Middle East when it comes to Trump's family. But like when you look at the Hunter Biden laptop, it's not that big of a deal. Like, yeah, it's some level of corruption, but goddamn, we're talking about millions of dollars being traded in the Middle East when it comes to Trump's family.
First, polling suggested that 1/3 of Democrats said that they may have changed their vote if they understood that the Hunter Biden laptop story was true. Second, it's not just that Hunter Biden was making money from these corrupt foreign institutions. It's that it was happening while his dad was the point person for weeding out corruption in those very same areas. For example, we saw.
I don't think people would change their mind, though. I think even if they
that.
had the facts on the Hunter Biden laptop, they wouldn't have changed their minds.
Even if you
like we went through, he grabbed them by the blank, right? We lived through that. We have lived through time after time again of, oh, this should end someone's political campaign, but it doesn't. So, like, I think even if people got the full story of the Hunter Biden laptop, half of the people that should be listening to would have been in denial. They wouldn't have cared, and the other half would have fought and wouldn't have cared.
Even if you start with something so small and minuscule and what seems very unimportant, usually that means it can get bigger and bigger and bigger to other things, right? So, you know, just the same as if somebody lies to you about something it was really small and tiny and minuscule, it didn't matter, then what else are they willing to do with the bigger stuff, right? You know, so I think the whole Hunter laptop thing, like, because it just shows that if they're willing to cover that up just for one thing, then what else are they willing to do?
So and that was part as the FBI was doing it on behalf of the campaign for Biden, and they were in cahoots with both big tech and the FBI to basically spread out false narratives about it and to willfully choosing not to let it get out.
Sorry, Rob, you can go. I know you've been
there's several arguments to make about this. I've lost my train of thought a little.
Seems like you guys have got this one down, so
lost my train of thought a little there, but to do it in reverse order, whoever that was just talking there, the real story here is it doesn't matter if it would have changed one vote. What matters is that our government agencies were putting their thumb on the scale of the election in order to attempt to help one party win. That's the problem. Post hoc justifying by saying, well, we don't think it would have changed votes anywhere is irrelevant to the whole conversation. However, if we delve deep into this, no, it's not just a matter of, it was as simple as he made money at Gazprom, but haven't people in Trump's family made money as well? The problem was the exact nature of this political attack. One, when you look at what this was saying, it was saying that Hunter Biden did things like work for, and I'm quoting now, the spy chief of China, which most people in this country would think were the biggest foreign adversaries that we had. Secondly, it showed that the attacks on Trump, other than the pandemic, that were the most successful and the most used by Democrats, were his connection to a hostile foreign power. So if it turned out that actually Joe Biden himself said Zlochevsky, the guy that was running Burisma that his son was working for, was working as a hostile Russian oligarch, that would seem to take away one of their biggest offensive weapons against Trump and prove him to be a hypocrite and a liar. And the last thing was, I'm open to hearing any discussions of corruption of the Trump family. Can you show me him, or for that matter, any president in the history of this country that has issued a quid pro quo to the tune of any amount of serious taxpayer dollars to force the firing of a prosecutor? Can anyone show me in the history of the United States that ever occurring?
And not just a prosecutor in a foreign country.
Right. Well, not just a prosecutor in a foreign country, but leave them answer first, and then we'll get to the...
Hang on. Wait. I remember Donald Trump making a very good phone call in 2019.
Me too.
Right? I remember him making a very... So, like, in my opinion, that is a certain level of pressure when you literally have a president calling the Ukrainians,
hang on,
very much
wasn't
one
the difference was one was official State Department policy and one was a president looking to get dirt on his political opponents? Wasn't that the difference of those?
Okay, several things. Show me the official
from the executive branch.
Show me the official State Department policy before Joe Biden issued that quid pro quo. Go ahead.
What do you mean?
A claim was just made that it was okay for Joe Biden to issue a
so if it's directly benefiting Donald Trump, if he's trying to find dirt on his political opponents, what the hell would that be?
Why you guys keep doing this pull out the evidence out of your ass right now thing when we're bringing up a subject?
Yeah, like I don't have.
I love how you guys are ignoring the whole point of what Rob is bringing up.
I love how you guys are all ignoring me when I try to interrupt and tell you.
Yeah, we should apologize for that.
Shame.
You should.
Yeah,
shame on you. Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Okay, there's two people I'm talking to that are making two different arguments. One person is making the argument, but what about Trump? The other person's making the argument, there's something that was uniquely different here because it was actually official State Department policy when it came to Biden's quid pro quo, but not with Trump's alleged quid pro quo. And so
when it's coming from the president himself, how is that not?
And then what we have is Avius continues to interrupt me as I'm trying to answer the person that wasn't him.
Bad.
Right, that's what's going on, right?
Yeah,
so
go
I'll
ahead,
happily answer what you're talking about as well, right? What I'm saying is, Effigy, of course, no one expects you to have this evidence at a moment's beck and call. I totally understand that. The problem for you, though, Effigy, is I've debated people over and over and over about this, and that evidence doesn't exist. There is no evidence that says it was official State Department policy for Joe Biden to issue a quid pro quo. In fact, there's not even compelling evidence prior to November, I believe, of that year that there was anyone at the State Department or anywhere else that was suggesting that Victor Shokin, the prosecutor that was looking in to Joe Biden's son's company, should be fired. Quite to the contrary, we see contemporaneous evidence that suggests that when it came to our European allies, they were saying that they thought anti-corruption efforts in places like Ukraine were ramping up and that they were happy and okay with sending money there. But we actually have audio or video evidence of one of the staffers that was on Air Force Two with Biden as he went over for his famous quid pro quo discussion, saying it was Biden himself that came up with the idea of the quid pro quo. So even now, post talk,
but that's the point, though, right? Wasn't the official policy of the United States of trying to get the people they thought in the Ukrainian government who were basically bad actors that were backed by Russia out of the way? Wasn't that the whole point?
Well,
I could be wrong, but
no, the whole point was that.
Wait, sorry. Can I?
No,
seize control again?
Yeah,
I'm gonna seize control of
let's let Coder
the
speak. Okay.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I haven't researched this in like 2 years. I'm out of my depth.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it. But what I'm just wondering, Rob, do you think that are you saying that Joe Biden did an illegal quid pro quo? Like he went through illegal channels to do this.
It's interesting. You make this illegal. I'll say it depends. I say that it warranted.
You make this point a lot for good reason.
I would say that it warranted a significant FBI investigation, right? The channel, as what you're trying to say is, did he properly register as a foreign lobbyist or something like that? It's irrelevant to the question. Let's ask the question. I'll ask it to everyone in the panel.
I think it is relevant. Wait. The reason it is relevant to what I'm asking, because I'm asking if Biden did something that was criminal.
Yeah, he did.
Okay, let me ask the question real quick to everyone in the panel, right?
Well, when I get the chance, I will
If
tell
an
you.
executive agent, right, whether it be president, vice president, someone in the cabinet, etc., from the executive branch, takes a huge sum of your tax dollars to force the firing of a prosecutor who's looking into one of their family members, do you think that reeks of corruption and should be investigated?
Should absolutely be investigated. Yeah,
sure.
It should be investigated. Yeah, I'll give you that.
So then why did the FBI not immediately start investigating it? Why was it that this was basically covered up? And why did the FBI then go the step further and seem to prime social media companies that stories that would show that going into the 2020 election would be Russian disinformation?
I mean, as far as covering up the Twitter files, I feel like it's a completely understandable explanation to say, like, yeah, the story of Hunter Biden dropping his laptop off to this blind laptop.
Yeah, it sounds like bullshit. Okay, it just sounds like bullshit.
And not sharing it to anybody and making sure that nobody can corroborate that. But that doesn't feel super believable to me. But now, the fact that it did turn out real, that is a problem, and I think it's unfortunate that the story was censored. But to be fair, it also kind of gives people reason to be like, hey, this story sounds kind of fishy. Like, I can understand why people would say, hey, this reeks of all of the tellings of this information, even if it wasn't.
Okay, let me ask you a question real quick.
Hang on. Okay, we're so off the rails. We are so off the rails. Like, I think.
Well, if we're gonna switch the topic, can we let Rob ask the question?
Just real quick. I'll be quick, Bo. I promise.
Yeah. Okay.
Before we switch.
Yeah. Did you think it sounded believable that a germaphobe like Donald Trump rented a hotel that Obama once stayed in to get pissed on in a bed?
No, I don't think that's
stranger things have happened.
And yet, all the media reported on that.
Look, crazy things happen when you're rich.
Let me finish. And yet, all the media reported on that uncritically, and no one at the FBI said this reeks of Russian disinformation. In fact, the FBI knew at that point that was disinformation that was paid for by Hillary's camp, and yet they didn't intervene. I wonder why.
It was originally paid for by the Republicans. That's how Hillary got it.
Prove it. You're a liar.
It was.
You're a liar.
Because it came from that former MI6 guy, and they've got it for during the early campaign.
You mean the guy that was paid to give his dossier to the Clintons?
I mean, there was substantial reporting at the time that the McCain camp was responsible. That doesn't mean it was necessarily corroborated. I'm not going to say it was corroborated.
We are way off course.